The frontier was a place where the sun seemed to hang lower, burning the plains into gold and sorrow. In the spring of 1871, the Carter family's wagon creaked across that endless horizon, dust rising behind the wheels like ghosts of all who had come west before them. Evelyn Carter, only 19, rode beside her father, a preacher bound for a small settlement near the Brazos River. She was a girl raised on hymns and hope, her world a narrow circle of Sunday lessons, garden chores, and the dream of someday teaching children in the little frontier schoolhouse her father meant to build. That morning, the prairie was still. Birds wheeled above the scrub and the wind carried the smell of rain. Then from the ridge a hawk screamed, a warning too late. The attack came fast, too swift for thought or prayer. Dark shapes on horseback swept down in a blur of color and motion, faces painted, braids flying, rifles gleaming. The Comanche were the masters of that land, their horses born of the wind itself. The settlers' rifles cracked once, twice, and then chaos swallowed sound. Evelyn's father fell, blood spreading across his shirt. Her mother screamed, reaching for her. Evelyn's world dissolved into dust and hooves and terror. A hand seized her arm, strong, rough, and unrelenting. She tried to fight, clawing and kicking, but the man who held her swung her onto his horse like she weighed nothing. The ground disappeared beneath her. The plains blurred past. The young warrior's name was Toka. He rode with his father's raiding party but was no mindless killer. He had seen too much blood already in his 21 years. The old men called him proud, reckless, a spirit that refused to bend. He fought because war was all the world had offered him, yet even in the smoke of raids he carried a restlessness, a longing for something different, though he couldn't have named it. When the dust cleared that day, the Comanche carried what they wanted: horses, guns, and the frightened daughter of a preacher. The tribe rode south toward the hidden valley where their camp lay beside a river lined with willows. Evelyn's wrists were bound, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears and dust. She didn't cry anymore. The shock had dried her eyes. When they reached the camp, the people gathered to stare. Some laughed. Others spat at the sight of the pale girl. Among them, the old chief, Toka's father, Red Elk, stood silent. He saw the way his son's gaze lingered on the captive and made his decision. The white men had taken their land, their bison, their freedom. Taking one of their women, he reasoned, might balance the scales of fate. He declared that the girl would belong to his son, not as spoil but as wife, sealing a truce with the settlers who skirted their hunting grounds. Toka felt the weight of the words like a chain. A wife. He hadn't asked for one, least of all a trembling white girl who flinched from his every glance. But a son did not refuse a father. That night, under a blood-red sunset, the women brought Evelyn into a small hide tent at the edge of the camp. They stripped away her torn dress, bathed her with cold water, and wrapped her in deer hide. She tried to pray, but the words came out broken. She imagined her father dying on that prairie and whispered apologies to a god who suddenly felt far away. When Toka entered the tent, she pressed herself against the far wall, clutching the blanket to her chest. He stopped in the doorway, watching her. The firelight flickered over his face, bronze skin, black hair tied with a feather, eyes dark as river stones. He didn't move closer. For a long time, neither spoke. "You are my wife now," he said in halting English. His voice was deep but not unkind. She shook her head. "No, you can't." He cut her off with a single gesture. "My father's word is law." Silence thickened. Then he surprised her. He dropped a bundle at her feet, a folded blanket, a wooden bowl of food, and a small water skin. "You eat," he said quietly. "You sleep. I do not hurt you." Then he turned and left. For days, Evelyn lived in a world of fear and confusion. She was watched constantly. The Comanche women mocked her clumsiness. The children followed her like curious birds. She refused to eat at first, hoping starvation might free her. But Toka's patience did not break. He brought her food every evening and said little. When she tried to run, slipping into the tall grass under the cover of night, he followed her silently. The prairie was too wide, too strange. She lost her way before dawn. When he found her, trembling and barefoot, he didn't strike her. Instead, he wrapped his own blanket around her shoulders and lifted her onto his horse. "You die alone," he said softly. "Better to live." That was the first time she heard compassion in his voice, and it frightened her even more than anger. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's world narrowed to the rhythms of camp life. The sound of drums at dusk, the smell of smoke, the cries of children at play. She watched how the people lived, how they honored their elders, how they loved their horses more than their own lives. They were fierce and proud, yes, but also human. And she began to see something in Toka that defied the image of the savage she'd been taught to fear. He was respected by his people, yet often walked apart from them, quiet and brooding. Sometimes, when he thought no one watched, he looked toward the horizon with the same longing she felt, the ache for something beyond this endless struggle. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. Thunder cracked and rain poured in sheets. Her tent leaked. Before she could move her bedding, Toka appeared, drenched, carrying another hide. He tied it above her head, shielding her from the rain. When lightning flashed, their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. She saw weariness there, not cruelty. He turned to leave, but she whispered, "Why? Why do you care?" He didn't answer. But later, when she woke to find him sleeping outside her tent, sword across his knees, she understood that his silence meant protection. The next morning, the sun rose over a washed, clean world. For the first time, Evelyn stepped outside without fear. She still despised her captivity, still prayed for deliverance, but the hatred had dulled, replaced by something harder to define. The tribe accepted her presence slowly. An old woman, Moon Deer, took pity on her, teaching her to grind corn and braid her hair. The rhythm of work dulled her grief. She began to pick up words: water, fire, horse, sky. When she managed to thank Moon Deer in the Comanche tongue, the old woman smiled. The first smile Evelyn had seen since her capture. And all the while, Toka watched. He didn't touch her, though the right was his by tribal law. He didn't force her to share his bed. But each day some invisible thread drew them closer. A nod here, a word there, the brush of hands as he handed her food. Beneath all her fear, something stirred in her chest. Not love, not yet, but a dangerous curiosity. For Toka, too, a change was taking root. He had expected to hate her, to see her as a symbol of all that had been stolen from his people. Instead, he saw courage in her stubbornness, grace in her defiance. The girl who had trembled at his approach now met his eyes. He found himself listening for her laughter, rare though it was. But such emotions were forbidden luxuries in a world ruled by survival. His father reminded him that she was only a tool, a living symbol of their dominance. Yet when he looked at her, he no longer saw victory. He saw the possibility of peace, and it terrified him. One night, as the fire burned low, he said to her, "You think I am your jailer. Maybe I am, but I did not ask for this." Evelyn looked at him across the flickering light. Nor did I. Their eyes held. For the first time, the space between them felt not like a wall, but a door, one neither yet dared to open. Thus began the strange, fragile beginning of what would become their story, not of hatred nor of forced power, but of two souls bound by circumstance and reshaped by understanding. In the heart of captivity, amid silence and suspicion, the first faint spark of human connection flickered to life. Neither of them knew it yet, but that spark would grow until it burned away everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and freedom. The days that followed the storm marked the beginning of a strange calm in Evelyn's life. Fear still lived in her bones, but it no longer ruled her every heartbeat. The wild land around her, once a landscape of nightmares, began to reveal a quiet rhythm, the whisper of wind in the willows, the steady beat of hooves in the distance, the call of hawks circling above the plains. The world was still cruel, still foreign, but she began to see beauty in it. She spent her mornings grinding corn beside Moon Deer, the old woman who had claimed her as a helper, and her afternoons mending hides near the edge of camp. The women no longer jeered quite as openly. Some even began to accept her presence, though not with warmth, more like a wary tolerance. Evelyn worked without complaint, too afraid that defiance might bring punishment. But when Toka passed by, she always felt his gaze upon her, heavy and unreadable. The distance between them remained. He spoke little, often riding out for days with the other warriors to hunt or scout. Yet even when he was gone, his shadow lingered over her days. The memory of his quiet protection, the way his eyes softened when she stumbled through a Comanche word. She didn't want to think of him as anything but her captor, and yet, she couldn't quite hate him anymore. Her view of the Comanche shifted too. In the settlement, she'd been taught that they were savages, heathens who scalped the innocent and burned homes for sport. But in the camp, she saw something else. She saw mothers humming to their children under the moonlight, men carving flutes that sang to the prairie wind, and elders telling stories that carried the weight of generations. They prayed not in churches but under the open sky, to spirits that lived in rivers and stars. She began to wonder, who was the true savage, the one who killed for land, or the one who fought to keep it? One afternoon, while gathering water by the river, Evelyn saw her reflection rippling beside that of a young Comanche woman, Atsadi, who had been watching her silently for days. Atsadi had once loved Toka. Everyone in the camp knew it. She despised the pale stranger who had taken her place. "You think you belong here?" Atsadi said in broken English. Her tone was cold. "You never be one of us." Evelyn flinched, clutching her water jug. "I don't want to belong," she said softly. Atsadi's eyes narrowed. "Then why he look at you like that?" The question burned in Evelyn's mind long after the woman walked away. That evening, Toka returned from a hunt. Dust streaked his face, his shirt was torn, and he carried a bow across his shoulder. He paused when he saw her by the fire, her hair braided like the Comanche women wore it. She had learned to sit cross-legged now, to weave, to watch without speaking. For the first time, he noticed not the pale skin that set her apart, but the strength in her posture. "You learn," he said simply. Evelyn glanced up, unsure whether it was praise or mockery. "I try," she answered. Toka nodded once and walked on. But later that night, she saw him again, sitting alone on a rock outside the camp, staring at the stars. On impulse, she approached him. "Why do you fight?" she asked. He didn't turn to look at her. "Because they take. Always take," she hesitated. "The settlers?" He nodded. "They burn villages, kill buffalo, say this land not ours." "My father said the same," she whispered, ashamed. That was the first honest conversation between them. Halting, painful, yet real. Toka spoke of raids and massacres, of brothers lost to the rifle and disease. Evelyn told him of her family's journey west, of her father's belief that God had given them this land to tame. The chasm between them was vast, yet in that quiet, something bridged it. Over the next few weeks, their strange companionship deepened. When Toka returned from hunting, he brought her a small carved figure, a horse made of bone. "For you," he said awkwardly, "to keep safe." She didn't know whether to refuse or thank him, so she simply held it, tracing the smooth edges with her fingers. It became her talisman, a reminder that kindness could bloom in even the harshest soil. But not everyone in the tribe approved. The younger warriors whispered that Toka had gone soft. One night, a man named Nako, bold and cruel, confronted him before the fire. "You let the white woman tame you," Nako spat. "You forget who you are." Toka's jaw tightened. "I forget nothing." "Then prove it." The fight was brutal, fists and fury under the moonlight. When it was over, Nako lay in the dirt, blood on his mouth, and Toka's knuckles were torn. Evelyn, watching from the shadows, felt both fear and something she could not name, something fierce and protective rising inside her. That night, she brought him water. He was sitting by his tent, head bowed, shoulders trembling from exhaustion. She knelt beside him silently, dipping the cloth into the bowl. When her hand brushed his arm, he didn't pull away. "You shouldn't have fought for me," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes dark as the night sky. "Not for you," he said. "For respect, for peace." But she saw the lie flicker in his gaze. Days later, an accident bound them even closer. Evelyn had begun to ride again under Toka's watchful eye. Her first attempts were clumsy. She'd never sat a bareback horse before. One afternoon, a startled mustang reared, throwing her into the river. The current was swift, the water cold as ice. She gasped, flailing, certain she would drown. Then Toka was there, diving in, arms closing around her, hauling her to shore. She coughed and shivered, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. His hair dripped over her face. His breath came fast. "You fight river like warrior," he said, smiling faintly. "I can't even swim," she whispered, shaking. He wrapped her in his furs. "Then I swim for you." Something changed then, something they could no longer ignore. From that day on, she felt his presence like a heartbeat, near even when unseen. When their eyes met, neither could look away. The air between them hummed with a tension that was no longer fear, but something deeper, warmer, more dangerous. Still, Both resisted it. For Evelyn, to care for him felt like betrayal. To her father, to her faith, to everything she'd been taught. For Toka, to desire her meant dishonor before his people and defiance of his father's command. Yet the human heart rarely bows to logic or law. As summer deepened, they rode together more often. Her learning to hunt, him teaching her the meaning of the land. She saw him smile for the first time, really smile, when he showed her a newborn foal in the grass. "Comanche born to ride," he said. "Like wind," she smiled back. "Then maybe I'll learn to be wind too." He laughed, the sound startling them both. It felt like a bridge finally built, fragile but real. That night, when she lay under the stars, she couldn't sleep. She thought of her father's sermons about sin, purity, and the dangers of temptation. But when she remembered the warmth in Toka's eyes, the way he had risked himself for her, she felt something sacred rather than sinful. A different kind of faith, the faith that hearts could change. For Toka, the transformation was equally confusing. He dreamed of her often, her laughter, her scent, the way sunlight caught in her hair. The woman he'd been forced to take had somehow become the one thing he couldn't imagine losing. Yet deep within him, pride battled tenderness. He was a warrior, son of a chief. She was the daughter of his enemy. How could such a bond survive a world built on vengeance? He didn't know. But when he saw her walking among his people, head high, no longer afraid, he felt something bloom in his chest, a fierce pride unlike any he'd known. The clash between their two worlds was not just between white and Comanche. It was between past and future, hatred and hope, command and choice. And as the summer sun bled across the horizon, both of them began to sense that the war outside them was nothing compared to the war rising inside their hearts. That war would soon ignite into something neither could contain. Desire, the wild and dangerous force that would change the course of both their lives forever. By late summer, the plains shimmered beneath relentless heat. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and sun-baked grass, the rivers ran low, and the days stretched long and languid. For Evelyn, those endless afternoons became the measure of her transformation. She was no longer the trembling girl who had clutched her father's Bible and prayed for death. She had learned to live in this wild place and, in a strange way, to belong to it. Her skin had darkened from the sun. Her hands had grown rough from work, and her eyes, once wide with fear, now watched the horizon with quiet resilience. She could ride a horse bareback without falling, braid her hair the way Comanche women did, and speak enough of their tongue to understand laughter, warnings, and the soft cadence of Toka's voice when he spoke to her. It was Toka who had taught her the rhythm of survival. At first she had resisted his lessons, angry that he presumed she would stay long enough to need them. But when she realized that escape was impossible, learning became her only act of power. So she watched him, how he moved through the world as if it obeyed him, how the horses trusted his touch, how he read signs in the wind and sand that were invisible to her. And the more she watched, the more her fear gave way to something far more dangerous. Fascination. He too had changed. The proud, cold warrior she first met now carried a different energy about him, quieter, more introspective. He still hunted, still fought when necessary, but there was a distance between him and the other warriors, as if his thoughts wandered elsewhere. The tribe noticed. The women whispered. And when his father, Red Elk, saw the way his son's eyes lingered on the white woman, he warned him, "Desire for what is not yours brings only sorrow." Toka did not answer, but that night he couldn't sleep. The warning echoed in his chest, battling with a truth he could no longer deny. He did desire her, not in the way men desired conquest, but in the way a thirsty man desired water. She had become part of his thoughts, his days, his every decision. He dreamed of her often, her laughter when she forgot to guard herself, the way she hummed softly to herself when she worked, the moment she had smiled at him by the river. He'd seen that smile in 100 battles since, haunting him more than any wound. For Evelyn, the realization came slower. It began with small moments. The warmth of his voice when he spoke her name, the steadiness of his hands when he guided her horse, the faint smell of smoke and earth that clung to him. It frightened her how safe she felt near him. At night, lying under her blanket, she would hear his voice outside her tent as he kept watch. The sound soothed her. Against her will, she began to look forward to it. One night, after a day of hunting, Toka returned injured, a shallow cut along his side from a wild boar's tusk. He brushed it off as nothing, but she could see the pain etched in his face. When he sat down near her fire, she knelt beside him. "Let me help," she said, reaching for his wound. He stiffened, more from surprise than pride. "You know how?" he asked, skeptical. She nodded, recalling the frontier remedies her mother had taught her. "Hold still." She cleaned the cut with warm water and herbs, pressing the cloth gently against his skin. The contact sent a shiver through her. His body was solid, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the breath between them. When she finished, she tied a strip of cloth around his torso and looked up at him. Their faces were inches apart. "Thank you," he said quietly. His eyes held hers and something passed between them, silent but undeniable. She looked away first, her cheeks warm. "It's nothing," she whispered, but it wasn't nothing. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way he'd looked at her, the faint tremor in his voice. It stirred something deep in her chest, a longing she didn't have words for. In the following days, they began to talk more freely. She asked about his childhood. He told her of his mother, who had died when he was 12, and of the time he'd seen buffalo stretch across the plains like a living sea. She told him of her home in Missouri, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings and the taste of apple pie cooling on her mother's windowsill. He listened, enraptured, as if trying to imagine that faraway world. One evening, as the tribe celebrated a successful hunt, Toka brought her to the fire. Music filled the air, drums and flutes, laughter and dancing. For the first time, Evelyn joined in. The women painted her hands with ochre, and she clapped along with the rhythm. When Toka caught her watching him, he extended his hand. She hesitated, but only for a moment. Then she took it. They danced together under the starlight, surrounded by the song of his people. His hand was warm around hers, his movements fluid, guiding her in the rhythm of the drums. She forgot herself, the world, her captivity, even her fear. In that instant, she was just a woman and he a man. The rest of the world fell away. Later, when the celebration quieted and the others drifted to sleep, he led her to the edge of the river. The moonlight turned the water to silver. She stood barefoot on the bank, her reflection shimmering beside his. "You are not afraid anymore," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, not of you." He looked at her for a long time, then took a step closer. His voice was low, uncertain. "You could have hated me forever. Why did you not?" Evelyn swallowed, her heart beating fast. "Because you gave me reason not to." It was the first time she spoke her truth aloud. And when he leaned in and kissed her, slowly, reverently, as if afraid she might vanish, it felt like the earth itself held its breath. Her hands rose to his shoulders. His fingers trembled as they touched her cheek. It was not a kiss of conquest, but of surrender. Every wound, every fear, every boundary between them melted in that moment. When they finally parted, she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "You were forced to marry me. But this is mine to give." He touched her hand, eyes dark and soft. "No longer because of law," he said, "because of heart." From that night onward, their bond changed. They were no longer captor and captive, not even husband and wife bound by custom. They were two souls who had chosen each other in defiance of the world. In secret, they shared quiet moments, talking by the fire, walking through the tall grass at dawn, laughing softly in the shadow of the hills. The tribe noticed but said nothing. Some looked away. Others whispered that perhaps the spirits themselves had destined their union. Evelyn's heart was both full and fearful. She knew the world beyond this valley would never understand what had grown between them. The settlers would call it sin. The Comanche would call it weakness. Yet in her heart she felt neither guilt nor shame. What she felt was truth, raw and undeniable. And for Toka, the change ran deeper still. The warrior who once fought only for pride now fought for love. When he looked at her, he no longer saw an enemy's daughter. He saw the woman who had brought peace to his restless spirit. She had become his compass, his prayer, his home. As autumn approached, the first chill winds swept across the plains. The buffalo began their migration south, and the tribe prepared to follow. But for Evelyn and Toka, the turning season carried an unease they couldn't name. The world beyond their hidden valley was shifting. Soldiers were moving through the frontier again. Settlers spoke of vengeance for old raids. The peace they'd found might not last, but for now, just for now, they had each other. And that was enough. Under the fading light of the harvest moon, they lay together for the first time, not as captive and warrior, not as white and Comanche, but as man and woman, two halves of a story neither had expected to live. The passion between them was not wild but sacred, born of suffering, tenderness, and choice. It was the moment when both realized that desire had not destroyed them, it had set them free. The winds of autumn carried more than the scent of change. They carried whispers of war. Word spread across the plains. The U.S. cavalry was pushing deeper into Comanche territory, driving the tribes from their hunting grounds. Smoke rose in the distance, marking where settlements and villages alike had burned. The world beyond their camp was unraveling, and even in their hidden valley, Evelyn and Toka could feel its tremors. Evelyn sensed it first. The men of the tribe began leaving before dawn and returning at dusk, faces tight with worry. Children were told to stay close. Fires were kept low at night, and women spoke in hushed voices. Toka became more distant, his body still present but his thoughts far away. When she asked what troubled him, he only said, "The white men come again. They take and do not stop taking." She knew he was right. Her father had once spoken with the same fear, though from the opposite side, about savage raids and vengeful tribes. Yet now she saw how blind that fear had been. The Comanche fought not for conquest but for survival, and as she watched them gather weapons and supplies, she realized she no longer knew where she belonged. That night, when Toka finally returned from council, she met him at the firelight. His expression was grim. "There will be a battle," he said quietly. "Soldiers move toward our lands. My father wishes to send the women and children south to the canyon. You must go with them." Evelyn's heart clenched. "And you?" "I will stay and fight." The word struck her like a blow. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "If you stay, you might die. You told me we had a future. How can I go without you?" He looked away, jaw tight. "I am Comanche. If I run, I am nothing. My people need me." Her eyes filled with tears. "And what am I to you then? Nothing too?" Toka's hands balled into fists at his sides. "You are the one thing I cannot lose," he said, his voice breaking with the force of it. "That is why I must fight, so that there will still be a place in this world for us both." She understood then that his battle was not just against soldiers, but against fate itself, and yet deep inside another truth burned. If he stayed, she could not leave him. The thought of fleeing to safety while he risked everything was unbearable. Days passed and the tension grew like a storm on the horizon. Scouts returned with grim news, hundreds of soldiers advancing, their wagons glinting like teeth in the sunlight. The elders prayed to the spirits, the warriors sharpened blades, and the air grew thick with the smell of leather, gunpowder, and fear. That night, Evelyn sat by the river, watching the moon ripple across the water. She remembered the girl she had been, the terrified captive praying to be rescued. Now she was a woman who prayed for courage instead. Behind her, soft footsteps broke the silence. "You should be sleeping," Toka murmured, settling beside her. "So should you," she replied, her voice soft. "Tomorrow will come too fast." He looked out at the water, then at her. "Do you regret it? Staying here with me?" She thought for a moment. "No," she said finally. "Even if it ends tomorrow, I would not trade a single day of it." He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing gently around hers. "If the spirits are kind, they will see us through this," he said. "But if I fall—" "Don't!" she interrupted fiercely. "Don't speak like that." He smiled faintly, sorrow flickering in his eyes. "Then let me say this instead. I never believed a white woman's touch could heal what war has broken in me. But you did. Whatever happens, know that my heart is yours." Before she could answer, he leaned forward and kissed her, slow, desperate, filled with the ache of 1,000 unspoken promises. The night held its breath around them as they clung to each other, as if love alone could hold back the tide of fate. When dawn came, the warriors rode out. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Evelyn watched Toka disappear into the horizon until he became nothing but a speck against the vast sky. The women and children began their journey south toward the canyon, but Evelyn lingered behind, her heart divided. She could not bring herself to go. By dusk she followed. She rode one of the spare horses, heading toward the distant sound of gunfire. The plains were alive with chaos, flashes of rifles, the cries of men and horses, the acrid smell of burning grass. When she reached the ridge, she saw the battle below. Comanche warriors circling the soldiers in a storm of dust and arrows, fighting with furious grace. Her eyes searched the field until she saw him, Toka, astride his painted horse, fearless as a storm god. But then she saw something else. A small detachment of soldiers was flanking the warriors, moving through the ravine toward the village, toward the women and children. Evelyn's blood ran cold. If they reached the canyon, the slaughter would be unimaginable. Without thinking, she turned her horse and rode toward them, her heart pounding in her chest. She shouted to warn the Comanche riders near the ridge, waving her arms wildly. Arrows whistled past her, soldiers yelled, and smoke filled the sky. It was madness. But in that chaos, something remarkable happened. Toka saw her, her pale dress streaked with dust, her hair streaming behind her, and his heart lurched. He spurred his horse toward her, shouting her name. Evelyn! When they met in the middle of the field, the world seemed to stop. The soldiers! They're heading for the canyon! She cried. They'll kill everyone. Toka didn't hesitate. Then we stopped them. Together they rode into the fray, two souls who should never have met, fighting side by side against the tide of history. The wind roared, rifles cracked, horses screamed, and still they rode. Evelyn fired a rifle she barely knew how to use. Toka shielded her, striking down soldiers with the strength of a lion. When the dust finally settled, the soldiers were retreating, the Comanche victorious, but bloodied. The canyon was safe for now, but victory carried a cost. Toka was wounded, a bullet lodged in his shoulder, blood soaking his side. Evelyn tore fabric from her dress and pressed it to his wound, tears streaking her face. Stay with me, she whispered. Please, Toka, stay. He smiled faintly through the pain. You came for me, he said, voice weak but full of wonder. You should have run. I couldn't, she said. I won't ever run from you again. He lifted a trembling hand to her cheek. Then I will fight to live. For you. The sun dipped low, bathing the battlefield in crimson light. Around them, the warriors began tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. The world was changed, and yet in that moment, Evelyn knew their love had survived its first true test. She had risked everything for him, and in doing so, she had proven to herself that what bound them was no longer circumstance, but choice. That night, as fires burned across the plain, she sat beside him holding his hand. He was weak but alive, his head resting in her lap. Around them, the tribe spoke softly of honor and survival. But when she looked down at him, she saw only peace. A man who had finally laid down his weapon, and a woman who had found her courage. And though the world beyond them was still at war, she knew they had won something greater. The right to love each other, no matter the cost. For love, she thought, was not a gentle thing. It was a battle, a fierce, unyielding promise made between two hearts who refused to be torn apart. Winter came early that year. The wind swept cold across the plains, carrying with it the scent of ash and sorrow. The battle had been won, but the victory was hollow. The tribe was diminished, many warriors dead, families torn apart, and food scarce. The U.S. cavalry would return, stronger and angrier. It was not a question of if, but when. For Evelyn, those weeks felt suspended between two lives. She spent her days tending to the wounded and her nights beside Toka, who still fought fever from his gunshot wound. The great warrior who had once seemed indestructible now lay weak beneath her hands. Yet even in pain, his spirit was fierce. Whenever he opened his eyes, he searched for her face, as if her presence alone tethered him to life. Sleep, she whispered one night, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. You need strength, his lips curved in a faint smile. When I sleep, I see you, he murmured. And when I wake, you are here. Maybe I am dreaming still. She brushed a tear from her cheek. Then dream forever if it keeps you alive. Outside, snow began to fall. The world softened under its white silence, but inside Evelyn a storm was brewing. The tribe could not stay where they were. The soldiers would come again, and soon. The elders spoke of heading deeper south, far from the white settlements. For Toka, this meant exile. For her, it meant vanishing completely. From her world, her people, her name. One evening, Red Elk, Toka's father, summoned her. The old chief had always regarded her with a mix of curiosity and caution. But now his eyes were weary, shadowed with loss. My son lives because of you, he said. For that, my heart is thankful. But you must understand, your presence divides him. He cannot lead with one foot in each world. Evelyn bowed her head. I never wished to divide him. Then you must decide what you will do, the old man said gently. Go back to your people if you can. There is no shame in it. You are not made for the life we live. The words struck her like a blade, not because they were cruel, but because part of her knew they were true. She had once belonged to a world of wooden churches, Sunday hymns, and well-dressed propriety. A world where women like her were expected to marry quiet men and live quiet lives. But when she thought of that world now, it felt like something she had read in a book long ago, a story she no longer believed in. She left the chief's tent and walked through the snow until she reached the ridge overlooking the plains. The moon hung low and bright, lighting the endless expanse of white. She thought of all she had lost and all she had found. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. "You heard?" she said. Toka nodded. "My father speaks truth. He fears for you and for me. If you stay, you will never see your people again." She turned, tears shining in her eyes. "And if I go, I'll never see you again." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with love and pain. Then he stepped forward, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm despite the cold. "I cannot ask you to give up your world," he said. "But if you stay, you must know there will be no peace. Always running, always hiding. You deserve more than that." Evelyn's voice broke. "And what do you deserve, Toka? To watch the world erase your people? To fight until nothing remains?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "If that is the cost of being who I am, yes." She reached for his face, turning him back toward her. "You once said desire changed the course of your heart. Then let it change your life too. Come with me. We can start somewhere new, together." The idea hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, and tempting. For a heartbeat, she saw it flicker in his eyes. A cabin near the frontier, horses grazing in the mist. A life built not on war, but on love. But the vision faded as quickly as it came. "My people would call me coward," he said quietly. "A man who fled when they needed him most." She shook her head. "They would call you alive." He smiled sadly. "You see the world as you wish it to be. I see it as it is." Snow drifted between them, settling on their shoulders. She wanted to scream, to make him understand that love was worth any sacrifice. But she also knew that for Toka, identity was not something he could shed. It was carved into his bones, the wind, the plains, the ancestors who whispered in his blood. That night they held each other as if the world were ending. And in a way, it was their world. Every touch, every breath was an unspoken goodbye. At dawn, Evelyn awoke to the distant thunder of hooves. Scouts raced into camp, shouting warnings, soldiers on the horizon. The tribe scattered into motion, gathering what they could. The last stand had come. Toka rose, still weak but determined. "Go south," he said to her. "You must not be here when they arrive." "No," she said firmly. "I won't leave you again." "Evelyn, don't ask it," she said. "Not now." He saw the fire in her eyes and knew there was no convincing her. So he simply nodded and said, "Then we face them together." The battle that followed was short and brutal. The Comanche fought with the ferocity of wolves cornered by the hunt. Gunfire split the air, arrows hissed, and the snow turned red beneath their feet. Evelyn stayed close to Toka, helping where she could, tending to the wounded, refusing to run. When it was over, the soldiers had retreated again. But so had the tribe. Half their people were gone, scattered into the hills. Smoke rose from the valley, curling into the cold blue sky. Evelyn and Toka stood amid the ruins of what had once been their home. He was bloodied and exhausted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She slipped her arm under his, helping him walk. "Where do we go now?" she asked softly. He looked out toward the horizon, the line where snow met sky. "Where the wind takes us," he said. They rode for days south and west, following no road and no flag. Finally, they came upon a quiet valley untouched by war where wild horses still ran free. There they built a small cabin from fallen timber and made a home with their own hands. It was not easy. The winters were harsh, the loneliness deep. Yet somehow together they made it through. Each dawn brought new challenges, but also new peace. In time, Evelyn bore a son, a child with her pale eyes and his father's dark hair. When she placed him in Toka's arms, she saw something change in him. The hard lines of a warrior softened. He smiled, a rare, quiet smile that seemed to hold both pride and sorrow. "He will belong to both worlds," Toka said, "and to none. But he will live free." Years later, Settlers would pass through that valley and speak of a white woman and her Indian husband, who lived alone in the hills, fierce and loyal as the eagles that circled above. Some called it scandal, others called it legend, but those who saw them together said one thing most of all, that their love had the stillness of truth, the kind that survives everything, war, loss, even time. And when Toka's hair turned silver and Evelyn's hands grew frail, they would still sit together at sunset, watching the horizon glow. Sometimes she would whisper, "Do you ever regret it, staying with me?" He would smile faintly, squeeze her hand, and answer, "No. Desire changed the course of my heart. You changed the course of my life." And beneath the vast, endless sky of the frontier, their story became not one of captivity or shame, but of love that dared to rewrite destiny itself.